5-2, rational numbers. The first part of this lesson is introducing you to a new type of number called the rational numbers. So we have sets of numbers that are on the board in blue, and we're simply going to name these types of numbers, and you've seen these before, or some of them. The first set of numbers we have are the natural numbers. They are given with the letter N for natural, and those are the numbers that start with the number 1 and go to 2, to 3, to 4, to 5. They're also called the counting numbers. The next set of numbers are the whole numbers. They get the letter W for whole numbers. The only difference between the whole numbers and the natural numbers is simply the number 0. The whole numbers start with 0 and get larger by whole numbers from there. Then we have the integers. They get the letter I. And you can see that the integers now add the negative numbers, which we learned about in Chapter 2. And then finally, we have the rational numbers. They get the letter Q. They don't get the letter Q because my name is Mr. Quinn. I didn't pick that. Somebody else did. They get the letter Q because Q is the next letter after the letter R. And R is actually used for a different set of numbers called the real numbers, which is the next set of numbers that encompasses all of these. However, the rational numbers are defined as numbers that are neither natural, whole, or integers. In other words, basic fractions and basic decimals. So here we have 2 and 5/8. Very important, we need to write that as a fraction. To review from back in the day, 2 times 8 plus 5. We want to turn this into a fraction. 8 times 2 is 16, plus 5 is 21. So that is a rational number, 21 over 8. 16 is a natural number. It's a whole number. It's an integer. 2 and 5/8 is just a rational number. Moving on. For the real reason we're doing this section, we're going to learn how to change decimals back into fractions. This is not nearly as difficult as yesterday's turning fractions into decimals. Yesterday was hard work. Today, it's much easier. Read it properly. That's it. The fraction and the decimal are read the exact same way. So I have 0.4 as the first example. That's not read properly. 0.4 or 0.4 is not the way you're supposed to say that. That is actually 4/10, because we have a 4 in the tenths place. So we say 4/10, which in reality is 4/10, 4 over 10. Don't simplify, just turn them back into fractions. That's all I want you to do. Okay, let's try the second one. 0.45. Not how you're supposed to read it. If you were, it would be what? 45 hundredths. Our last example, 1.375, again, not read correctly, but if you were to read it correctly, what would it sound like? 1 and 375 thousandths. So that's changing decimals into fractions. A lot easier than yesterday's work where you had to push all those buttons on a calculator. Now you just have to read stuff and you can rewrite it. However, things aren't always going to be that easy. Repeating decimals. How are we going to turn 0.8 with a line over it into a fraction? Very, 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 very messy. Because every time we have an 8 over 10, because that's all it's written there, 8/10 is 0.8. That example is 0.88. 8888. Goes on forever. There's no way to write that as a fraction using what we know now. But I'm going to show you a trick. If you actually rewrite this as 8 over 9 and type it into a calculator, you would get 0.888888888. Now, the calculator will make the last digit a 9 because it knows to round up because it doesn't have any more spaces. But for all intents and purposes, that is how to turn a repeating decimal into a fraction. So 8/10 with a line over it, so 0.8 with a line over it, is actually 8/9. We can expand that because we have 45/100ths-ish with a line over it. It repeats. So instead of being 45/9, we'll make it over 99. You should notice that we are subtracting 1 unit away from what the denominator is supposed to be. In 8/9, the denominator is supposed to be a 10 because it's 8/10, but that little line above it tells us to take 1 away from the 10 to make it a 9. 45/100ths with the little line over it tells us that we need to take 1 away from the 100 and make it a 99, so it's 45/99. You can check this by typing it into a calculator, and you'll get 45/99, is 0.454545. And then finally, our example with the squiggly lines, again, those are not 3s, those are not 7s or 2s or funny looking 5s. Those are squiggles. Didn't want to worry about burdening you with numbers, so we have squiggles. What would that be written as in fractional form? Squiggle, swiggle, swiggle over 999. The line above it tells us to take 1 away from whatever the denominator is supposed to be. So for some of your work, your denominators are going to be tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. For some of your other work, it might be ninths, 99ths, or 999ths. Your homework is on page 208, 12 to 48, the evens.